Hello and welcome to the Parenting NI podcast. It's Emma here with the monthly podcast from Northern Ireland's leading parenting support charity, where we discuss the parenting issues that can be concerning for many families. This month we're going to be looking at the impact of world news on children. And I didn't want to focus too heavily on current events, but given the situation that we're now in, I think it would be remiss of us not to mention it. As we record this episode, the world is dealing with the global pandemic of coronavirus or COVID-19. People are being encouraged to practice social distancing, limit all but necessary travel, and to work from home where possible. As it stands, schools are still open, but there is mounting pressure to close them. However, there's a lot to take into consideration if this were to be the case as well. Childcare for those working in the NHS and other lines of work who are unable to work from home, and the responsibility, would that then fall on grandparents who are at risk? What about children on free school meals, children due to sit exams such as their GCSE and A-levels, and parents who are facing the prospect of maybe having to be teachers for the next few months and keep up with the curriculum at home? So there's a lot to think about, and it's a very worrying time for all of us. I'm joined by Muriel Bailey, who is the Director of Family Support Services here at Parenting NI. How are you, Muriel?
Hello, Emma.
So unprecedented times we're living in at the minute, Muriel. And I'm not wanting to focus too heavily on it because I know people can pick these episodes up at any point in time and who knows what might happen. We don't know how long this is going to last for or if we'll ever see something like this in our lifetime again. But a lot of people will be feeling very anxious about it. And so I'm wondering if you maybe might have some guidance for parents who'll be concerned themselves in terms of looking after themselves, and then also for the children.
Okay. Well, I suppose you're right, Emma. The first thing to say is that it's just worrying in general for everybody. Adults, parents, all families, because it's so unknown. And we always, all of us, fear the unknown, regardless of our age or even how skilled or expert we may be in our own field. So the unknown is scary, and that's scary then for parents because if their children, which they are on a daily basis, hearing information from schools, information on the radio, information on the television, their friends or their neighbours who might be maybe older than some children will be talking about things that children maybe don't even understand the language.
Yeah.
There's all this fear, children are becoming anxious, and parents then probably feel that they have no ability to explain something that they don't understand themselves. So that can add to having double anxiousness within a household. We're not medically trained, and we want to say that from the offset that we don't have any answers, but what we hope we can do as an organisation, use the skills and expertise that we have and our relationship that we have had with parents for the last 40 odd years to actually help support the parents to support their children. That can come in various forms, but I think the first thing is for parents to recognise that it's okay to feel anxious, and it's okay if their children feel anxious. And for parents, it's particularly in different ages of children, but older children, to just say, I don't have any answers to some of these questions that you're asking me. What I can say to you is that sometimes if we listen to too much media coverage, it may not always be helpful, because if I don't have some of the answers, I could nearly be sure that some of the media coverage people don't have the answers neither. And sometimes things are being said that I'm not saying they're not true, but they may have no real founding at this point because this is new to everybody. So if parents can say that to older children and encourage them to just keep talking to them, everybody wants to learn about this. Everybody wants to explore what may happen next. And again, we don't really know, but if we keep that open communication going. For younger children, it's a little bit more difficult due to the fact that they might sense anxiousness at home, feel anxious but don't maybe know why they're anxious. I think it's about parents just being available to those children and to be available to care for them, nurture them when they feel that their younger children might be feeling the aftermath of other people's anxiousness. Their connectivity is even more important now. So that's what I would suggest, that we just try and be as open and as honest with each other as we can and support each other through this.
And obviously because people might be spending kind of extended period of time in the house now because well, I think the advice is that we can go outside and get exercise and all the rest of it. But if children are going to be off school, I mean, that kind of thing that you're saying about keeping that close contact, playing with your child.
Yes.
You know, even that can keep up things to do with education as well. It's children learn through play. So yeah.
I think if we think to ourselves, even as adults, the first thing that if you're stressed about something or uptight or sad, the first thing that can sometimes help you feel a bit better is that if somebody says something that's funny, or somebody cracks a joke, or somebody distracts you, that helps you for a few minutes or a few seconds to enjoy the fun at the time and maybe forget about what was worrying you. And it's that type of thing that helps people build their resilience and build their ability to not continually be focused on what may be causing them anxiousness. But also then, as you say, at home, parents have a lot on their plates. They're having to maybe possibly juggle a little bit of education as well as general care for their children, struggle with possibly maybe not being able to leave the house. They can maybe go to the garden, but they can't go too much further. They may be worried about food and different things that are coming in. So it's good to set time aside for a family to maybe do a craft activity, maybe go out into the garden, do some skipping, do some of the older games that we used to do, because possibly it's good not to always be hemmed up and watching TV or being on social media or online, and enjoy the fresh air and breathe in the fresh air. Fresh air is going to be really helpful for people's mental health. It's going to help you feel a bit more invigorated, and it's going to get you out of the four walls and make you feel a lot better. Yeah,
definitely. No better woman for this one, Muriel. I sometimes feel a wee bit more reassured just listening to all the things you have to say myself, never mind children. But anyway, if we even think outside of this pandemic at the minute, it would seem to me that children and young people are a lot more socially and possibly politically engaged than maybe they've ever been, because they have all this access to information all the time. If you think about the amount of young people that are engaged with the likes of climate change and LGBTQ plus rights and all this kind of stuff, even the body kind of positivity movement that's having a real surge of support online at the minute. And in one way that's a good thing, because I do think I have a lot of hope for our future generations in terms of how accepting they are and how willing they are to see change in society. But I do also think it's an awful lot of pressure on young people, and sometimes that must be hard to kind of manage. They feel this weight of the world nearly on their shoulders because they're getting all this access to information so quickly all the time. So do you think that children are maybe having too much access to this kind of stuff that when I was growing up I would have maybe not known anything about?
I think probably the difficulty we have is that it's good to have access to knowledge, and it's good to learn and make inquiry about new things. But I think the difficulty that arises sometimes is that we maybe don't have sanctions on age ranges as tight on some of the information that can be learned and shared. And I think it's when you have children and young people hearing about, reading about, or learning about things that sadly sometimes are completely outside anybody's control, but also maybe outside of the control of someone who might only be 7 years of age. So therefore they may worry about things that they are never able to resolve at that stage of their life, for whatever that may be. And therefore then they can take on this fear about something that potentially they may not needed to have known about, because they can't do anything about it. So I think it's about, again, us as adults in this world, and also parents, but all of us trying to look at ways of better encouraging children to learn through those mediums, but not necessarily having children who are too young to understand some things get access to them, because that in itself will bring on anxiousness when there's no need for it. And that can be anything. It's nothing to do with the situation we're in now. That can just be anything in general that a young person cannot make any attempts to change.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose a lot of young people, well, I mean, we're talking there about sort of 7, quite young children, they'll not have access, hopefully, at that stage to those kind of social media platforms. It's about 13, I think, is the age limit for the majority of them. But of course, they have access to the news, possibly, maybe it's about, making sure children aren't seeing too much of what's on the broadcast news at the minute, or maybe, as you say, keeping those lines of communication open and talking to them about realistically what's going on and how, reassuring them they are safe, and the vast majority of people will be okay. There's also a concern when we're talking kind of about all that sort of different media that children have access to. So outside of what we would have maybe seen growing up, which was either on the TV or in a newspaper, which now seems to be nearly a thing of the past. So because there are all these different mediums online, there's a concern about you hear this term fake news being bandied about. So what can parents maybe do to try and encourage those critical thinking skills in children around fake news, if you like, and things that might not be true?
I think that's a difficult one due to the fact that I have seen fake news myself, and sometimes I'm going, is that real? Is it not real? If you have the ability and the time probably is one of the key factors here, is that if a child's reading something or a teenager's reading something or they've seen something and they draw your attention to it and you can see yourself that it probably is 99% sure that it's fake news, I think it might be good to talk your child through some of that information in relation to getting them to see the rationale behind what they may or may not have read or heard about. And sometimes if you do it in small bits and take them through it step by step, a child and a teenager could come to the realisation from maybe analysing a certain line in that news, how real could that possibly be? Is that potentially going to ever happen? They could come to the realisation themselves that it's fake, but you've helped encourage them to look at some areas that potentially could never be true. But when you read an article or see an article in its full entirety, sometimes you can miss the bits that actually really do signpost you to thinking this is really nonsense. But you need to maybe teach a child or a young person to go and look or reevaluate what they've just read and really think about it and talk to others who can help them understand something a bit better. So again, it's about the communication.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have an article on our website as well around fake news, which is maybe worth checking out if this is something that you're concerned about in terms of maybe the sort of things that your children are accessing online. And as Muriel said, it's difficult for adults even to know sometimes whether this stuff is real or not. So do go and check that out on parentingni.org. I am also aware that the BBC are going to be running a campaign very shortly within the month of March around fake news. It's around kind of fake or facts, and they've got a lot of their journalists involved in this to try and help young people spot the differences between fake news and real actual factual journalism. So that's something to keep an eye out on as well. Muriel, maybe if we could look a wee bit more just in terms of we're saying about the anxiety that children can feel around the amount of world news that they now have exposure to. And it's something that I have been talking about with my family and my own life, I suppose, around kind of resilience in people. It's something that my own parents actually had been talking to me about in terms of the kind of struggles with mental health that seem just maybe more visible now maybe than they were before. And maybe would you have any tips for parents around kind of building resilience in children, if that's something that can maybe help us mentally deal with the impact of a lot of, not just this current situation, but a lot of things that are going on in life, because family life is stressful now. There's a lot going on for people. Would you have any tips for around building resilience in young people?
Building resilience is something that can be very subtle. You don't necessarily get a handbook on how to build a child or young person's resilience, but it comes back to, again, I think the first thing is about being open and honest with your children. Helping them understand that they don't and can't control everything that happens to them in their lives. And sometimes when we can accept that things will happen the way they're going to happen, but that we can get support from others, particularly our parents and our family and friends, to deal with what happens, that in itself starts to help build resilience, because children then can see that things may have appeared and felt bad at the time, but they can come out the other side of it, and they learn from that. So sometimes it might be helpful for parents at times to reflect back on something that the child has learned through a different situation, and remind them, well, wasn't that okay? Didn't that end up all right? To help reaffirm that, well, yes, I got through that, so I can get through this. Children sitting exams, children starting new schools, all those experiences subtly and in a very maybe sometimes awareness away, teach actually resilience in children and young people, because they get knockbacks on a daily basis when they're young. Sometimes friends don't want to be friends with them, but if they can talk to their parents about that and they get through that, that's building resilience. So those type of things are building resilience without us even realising. So I suppose I would just encourage parents to keep encouraging their children to do the best they can, to be open and honest with them, to talk to them. You don't necessarily have to have a book on how you get to build the resilience. It's just about keeping that communication going. And parents are a bit like a trampoline or like a big warm duvet blanket. When children come across an issue, it's about the bounce back and or the snuggle. So if a parent can help give that child the bounce back, that's resilience being built. Or if the parent can just be there with a big hug, that builds resilience too. Children just want to be accepted and want to feel that they're cared for and loved, and children can face an awful lot if they feel that what's happened to them is maybe normal and it's okay, but that there's somebody there who cares for them and that will help them through that.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking a wee bit earlier before we started the recording. You had mentioned a concept to me that I had never heard of before, the 3 C's. Can you tell me a wee bit more about that?
Well, a good few years ago, when I would have been doing some additional training and in a previous role with more children and young people, there would have been the 3 C's we would have talked about. So if particularly older children, if they were finding that they were having negative thoughts about an event that had happened or was going to happen, or they were worried about exams, for example, and they had maybe catastrophized the fact that they were going to fail all their exams, the first is then the 3 C's is catch their thinking. So if they're having negative thoughts around something that hasn't even happened yet, then it's about acknowledging that they're feeling like that. Control is very much, it's a bit like having a fishing rod, and if you visualize that in your head, so it's like reeling that thought back in. Why am I thinking like that? What is happening to make me really think that I'm going to fail all my exams? Why would I fail all my exams? So it's about bringing that thought back in and then changing the thought. So maybe I'm going to fail some exams because I maybe didn't work as hard in one class as I did in the other, or maybe I don't particularly like one subject as well as I like others. But there's nothing from that would signify you're going to fail all your exams. And I'm just using that as an example. It could be lots of things. So it's about then changing that thought, as in, well, I think I'm not going to fail them all. So then I might fail one, but hopefully I'm going to pass the other 4. So it's about just changing your thinking and trying to make it more positive. It can be related to anything. It can be related to even to adults on a day-to-day basis. If I'm going to drive my car to work, what happens if something happens and I never get there? But what basis is that thought shaped on? So it's about bringing it back on. Well, I got to work for the last 360 days. Why would I not get for the other 5 of those? So it's just changing your thinking. But you can make that for fun for children. It doesn't have to be maybe as what we say as sobering as my explanation. But children can do that in a fun way with their parents, and they could make a game out of it and try and change some negative thoughts.
Yeah, it's funny actually when we're thinking about it in the context of like these big world events and things, and sort of there is a tendency, particularly now, I think people do kind of catastrophize because they are worried. And if you think about something that my mum used to always say to me when we were wee was like, always look for the helpers, and you see that kind of bandied about on social media now as well. Like, what if you think, for example, everyone's stockpiling their loo roll and all these tins of food and all the rest of it, oh, I'm going to run out of food, there'll not be any more food. But then you see on TV all these people who are gathering stuff up for food banks, gathering stuff up to deliver to their, the elderly or the vulnerable in their community. And so even that kind of thing of changing your thinking about, like, well, there are good people, and people do come together to support people in hard times. So that's something to remember too.
And indeed, and the human race they are kind, and there's been loads of events have happened in the world. We've sadly had people's homes being ruined through flooding. We've had some terrible events that were completely outside of anybody's control. But when you rethink back to what happened, neighbours, friends, people from miles and miles around have gone out of their way to help those who are in need. And I think the same is like that in any event, but it'll be particularly the same now. People will do their utmost to help each other. And I do think that's important to remember. Do we rely on that solely? No, I think we should all make steps to help ourselves in any event, but we also shouldn't feel that we're all on our own, because we're all in this together.
Yeah.
So hopefully people will try and focus on that too.
Yeah, definitely. And while we're talking about kind of to bring this back maybe to something that you said earlier, I have been listening to something recently, another podcast actually, where they were talking to a psychologist about parenting, and the interviewers asked her if she could give one piece of advice to parents. I know that
Just
what on earth would that one piece of advice be? And I thought her response was quite nice actually, because she said to have a good sense of humour, which is maybe an odd thing to say when we're talking about very serious issues, but it can help to distract, as you said earlier.
I hope you're not going to ask me to tell a joke, Emma. No, I mean, if we can't laugh in this world, we can do very little else, really. I think we were all born with a sense of humour. Some of us have different sense of humours than others, but I think all that mixed together makes life fun. This isn't a great time to maybe think that we've anything to laugh about, but I do still think that if we look around and think that we've got very good family, we've got very good friends, some of them will be able to raise a smile in you, others will make you laugh, some may not, some might make you feel really doom and gloom, but if you put it all together in a mix, all that together makes a very good sound family and a very good support network. So I think it's good to focus on that, and we have to laugh, because things aren't going to change just because we laugh, but what will change is if we laugh and find fun in things, is how we feel and how we adapt and how we deal with things, and that's where some of your resilience will grow from again, because we will go out of our way to try and maybe make things funny or find the humour in things, and maybe that's a task we could all do at home. You know, everybody tell each other jokes and look for something that actually allows us to have a wee bit, even if it's only a 5-minute fun session, that we do something to make us all get back to what we want and what we can do, and make us feel better about things.
Yeah, and kids are great at that. Sure, kids come off with the funniest things all the time.
Well, we get plenty of knock jokes, I'm sure.
And what about if we were to turn that question to you, Muriel, like those interviewers asked? If I was to ask you if there was one piece of advice that you could give to parents, what would that be?
I think the thing I would say to parents, it could become a family motto for everybody in their home. We're all focused at the minute on the hand washing and making great fun out of that. And I think that's fabulous for children and for all of us in general, because I think none of us are that great all the time at washing hands. We need prompted. So I think the one motto I would say is, this too will pass. This will pass. We don't know when, on how long, but it will eventually pass. So if parents feel they need a bit of a pick-me-up themselves, just keep saying that into themselves, or say it as a family round the table when they're having dinner. This too will pass, because it keeps us all focused. It will end at some point, and it definitely will. So that would be my motto.
Well, that's great, Muriel. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me this month. So, a very surreal world that we're all living in right now. And you'll notice in listening to the episode that things have changed since we recorded. So the schools are now closed. That means that there's going to be a lot of new challenges at home for parents, as children will be learning from home for the foreseeable future. Parenting NI have developed a new article, and it's up on our website with some advice for homeschooling at this time. So that'll offer you some tips and some guidance on managing that at home, and just giving you some reassurance as well, because none of us expected to be in this situation where you're kind of having to be a teacher all of a sudden. So do check that out at parentingni.org. We'll also be sharing some support and guidance tips on our social media pages over the next while. You can search Parenting NI on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. I will hopefully be back again to chat to you next month. We're not quite sure what way the podcast is going to operate for the next few months. It might just be me reading you some tips and advice because it'll be quite difficult for us to manage maybe getting guests and things to appear on the podcast, just because we as an organisation are taking the steps and putting in measures in place to ensure that we are adhering to government and public health guidelines around social distancing and trying to reduce the wider impact of the spread of coronavirus. So we definitely will still be offering support for parents. Our support line is still available. You can contact it for free for support on 0808 8010 722. So please do get in touch if you're looking for some support. But as I say, the website and social media channels will still be providing information that hopefully you guys will find useful. So hopefully I will be back talking to you next month. If not, try not to miss me too much. And look after yourselves, look after one another. And as we've been saying in this episode of the podcast, take comfort in your family and your friends and in your community, and we'll all get through this together. Take care.